Okay, the Unionist response then to the passing of the Home Rule Bill in 1912. As you saw from the previous video, Home Rule Bill was passed in 1912 by the House of Commons. It was rejected by the House of Lords, but they could now only delay a bill that was passed by the House of Commons for 2 years. So it was due to become law in 1914. The Unionists were determined to have no Home Rule for Ireland. And if they couldn't prevent it for all of Ireland, they were at least going to prevent it for the northeastern part of the country where they formed a majority, that was Ulster. The responses were, first of all, that they set up what was called a Solemn League and Covenant. They had a sheet of paper which declared that they would have no Home Rule for Ireland and that they would fight against any attempt to impose it on Ulster. And people signed all this, men and women, okay? And from that then, they drew up a body called the UVF, or Ulster Volunteer Force. They were going to arm themselves, and they got arms from Germany, and they started drilling and preparing for a possible war with the nationalists in the south. Interestingly, Germany were prepared to sell them the arms because they wanted to cause some problems for England or Britain. Remember, at this time, Britain and Germany were not exactly at war, but there's always a possibility of war breaking out, which it did in 1914. So making mischief for the British suited the Germans at this time. The Unionists in the north also developed some propaganda to convince the Conservatives, who were their natural allies, and British public opinion that Home Rule for Ireland was a bad thing. And you'll be looking at some of those arguments, religious arguments and defence arguments that they used to convince people that they should not let Home Rule go ahead. Another response, but this was not the Unionists themselves, but people with family ties to the Unionists, was the Curragh Mutiny. The Curragh down in County Kildare, there was a big British Army barracks down there, and a number of the officers let it be known that if they were forced to go north to disarm the UVF, they were not going to do so. The mutiny never actually took place because they weren't asked to do it, so often it's put in inverted commas mutiny, but they clearly indicated to the government where their sympathies lay. Now, Home Rule never actually came into effect. It was very close to coming into effect. What happened was World War I broke out, and Unionists, as well as nationalists in the south, pledged their loyalty to Britain to go off and fight for Britain against the Germans. They did so both thinking, well, after the war, the British will look upon our desires, our wants, with some favour. Both could not be right, obviously, but the Unionists joined in their thousands, added the nationalists later on, to pledge their loyalty to Britain. Now, we're studying this for a number of reasons. A number of things here are very, very interesting. For years, Britain prided itself on being the mother of all democracies. And when things went against nationalists in Ireland, like for example Home Rule bills, and they were defeated by the process, they were told, well, you have to accept it, this is part of the process, this is democracy. Here, however, the UVF were allowed to set themselves up as an armed group and declare that we are not going to accept Home Rule. So in other words, they would accept democracy when it worked for them, they were not going to accept it if it didn't work for them. And they were allowed to set up this armed group in spite of the fact that it was very unconstitutional and very undemocratic. Similarly, armies throughout the world in democracies are supposed to respect and obey the commands or the orders of their democratically elected government. And here we see evidence in the Curragh Mutiny of members of the British Army saying, despite the fact that people have been democratically elected and this has been voted on and accepted by the Parliament, we're not going to accept that.